Somehow my friend group transformed into my ex's friend group, and it took me accidentally finding out a hidden group chat where they had been making fun of me for 8 months to open my eyes. I didn't say anything. I just slowly disappeared. My name is Elliot. I'm 29 years old. I'm 6'2". I have a big nose. I say this not for sympathy but for accuracy, because the nose becomes relevant, and I'd rather introduce it on my own terms than have it arrive later as a detail someone else defined. I have a big nose and I've known it since I was about 12, and I've mostly made peace with it in the way of someone who has spent 17 years deciding, repeatedly, that there are worse things to be and trying to believe it. I take quetiapine. I have for 2 years. It's an atypical antipsychotic, which is a clinical term that sounds more alarming than the reality, which is that it's a mood stabilizer used widely for bipolar II disorder, which is the thing I have, which is a thing I was diagnosed with at 27 after a couple of years of my brain doing things that I thought were just my personality, until a very good psychiatrist explained that my personality was fine and my neurochemistry needed some help. Quetiapine works. I want to say that clearly. It works in the sense that the thing in my brain that needed regulating is regulated, that the pattern of my moods is something I can navigate now in a way I couldn't before, that I am functional and stable and doing okay in every metric that matters. It also causes weight gain. This is not a personal failure or a lifestyle choice, or something I could address differently if I just tried harder. It's a documented, well-understood pharmacological effect. Quetiapine affects the histamine receptors in a way that increases appetite and slows metabolism, and the result, for many people, is significant weight gain regardless of what they eat or how much they exercise. In my case, 31 pounds in 18 months. I track it because my psychiatrist tracks it, and because knowledge is marginally better than not knowing even when what you know is uncomfortable. I told my friends about it. Not on the first day, not as a headline, but over time, in the way you tell things to people who are your people gradually in pieces in the context of real conversations. I told them about the diagnosis first, over dinner at a pub in March, about 8 months after I started the medication. I told them because they'd noticed I was different, more even, less prone to the crashes and the highs, and they'd asked, and because I trusted them with it. I told them about the weight separately, on a different occasion, with more difficulty, because the weight was the thing I was most self-conscious about, the thing I could see when I looked in mirrors and in photographs, and in the reflection of shop windows when I walked past, the thing that had taken a body I'd been relatively comfortable in, and changed it into something I had to learn to be in all over again. I sat in a restaurant and I told them the medical reality of it, that it was the medication, that it wasn't something I could fix without risking the stability I'd finally found, that I was working on accepting it, that the people I cared about not making a thing of it meant more to me than I could easily explain. They said the right things. They said, "We don't see it." They said, "You're being too hard on yourself." They said, "You're the same person you've always been." That was a Thursday. I found out later, with timestamps to confirm it, that the same evening, within 2 hours of that dinner, they had gone home and opened a group chat and typed about it. Let me tell you about the group before I tell you about the chat. I've known most of them since university. That's not unusual. A lot of adult friend group sediment at university form in the specific conditions of shared proximity and shared stress and the general permission to be unfinished that that period of life provides. We had been a group of 8, me, Ravi, Dom, Sasha, Chris, Priya, Jay, and a loose satellite of others who came and went. What the group had been, for the 6 years I'd known them, was mine. I don't say that possessively. I say it descriptively. I was the one who sent the first message when the group had gone quiet for too long. I was the one who organized the birthday dinners and remembered the anniversaries and showed up when someone needed showing up for. I was the infrastructure. Here is some of what that infrastructure looked like in practice. Ravi's car broke down on the M6 at 11:30 on a Wednesday night in January 2 years ago. He was 40 minutes from anywhere in the rain and his roadside cover had lapsed. He called me. I drove to him, 80 minutes round trip in the rain, waited with him for the recovery service, and drove behind the recovery truck to make sure he got back to his flat safely. We got in at 2 in the morning. He said he owed me one. I said forget it. I had work at 8. Sasha went through a period, about a year before the chat, where she was between jobs and genuinely struggling. Not dramatic struggling, but the quiet kind where you start declining invitations because you can't afford your share of the bill and you don't want to say so. I noticed. I started suggesting cheaper places. When that wasn't enough, I started quietly covering the difference and telling her to sort it whenever she was back on her feet and not making it a thing either way. It came to about £240 over 3 months. She never mentioned paying it back. I never brought it up. Dom had a situation with his landlord, a Section 21 notice that was procedurally incorrect, and didn't know what to do with it. I spent a Saturday afternoon on Shelter's website and legal advice forums, drafted a formal response for him, sent it to the landlord's letting agent, and the notice was withdrawn within 2 weeks. Dom told people he'd handled it himself. I knew because Ravi mentioned it once casually and then changed the subject when he saw my face. Chris, the 3 a.m. call. His father had a health scare, not serious in the end but terrifying at the time, and he rang me at 3 in the morning because he didn't know what else to do. I stayed on the phone for 2 hours. I was in work at 8:30. I did not mention this to anyone because it wasn't the kind of thing you mention. You answer the call, that's all. Priya, something I won't detail fully because it involves her mental health, and she is still a person with privacy regardless of everything else, called me from a very dark place 18 months ago. I will only say that I stayed with her in person for the night, and that I followed up every day for 2 weeks after until she was stable. She said I had saved her life. She said it sincerely, and I believe she meant it. Jay needed a reference for a job he wanted badly, and his previous employer had gone under. I wrote him a reference on headed paper from a freelance project I'd done that had a proper company name attached. It wasn't fraudulent. I'd worked with Jay on a collaborative project, and everything I wrote was true. It just had more weight than a personal reference would have. He got the job. These are not comprehensive. These are the ones I'm telling you because they're the ones that were in the chat. Her name was Maya. She moved to the city 18 months before the end of everything, from a small town in the Midlands, for a job in marketing that had promised her more than it delivered. She lived in a studio flat 10 minutes from the pub where we spent most of our Friday evenings. She knew nobody. I met her through a work connection, a colleague who knew her casually and mentioned she was struggling to find her footing in a new city and asked if I knew anyone who might include her in something. I brought her to a Friday night at the pub. She was shy in the specific way of someone who has a great deal to say and has not yet found the people she trusts to say it to. She sat at the edge of the group and listened more than she spoke and laughed quietly at things that were genuinely funny, and I watched the others try to include her with varying degrees of effort, and I made the extra effort because someone had to, and I was the one who'd brought her. Over the following weeks she opened up, gradually then more. She was funny, properly funny, with a dry observational quality that I found genuinely impressive. She was warm. She was interesting. The group liked her, and the group liking someone new was not a simple thing because a settled group has a social immune system and sometimes rejects additions that don't fit. Maya fit. She and I became close. A particular kind of closeness that lives in daily contact and shared jokes and the knowledge of someone's daily texture. We were together for 8 months. We broke up in October. We sat in a coffee shop and we talked about it for 2 hours in the way of two adults who respected each other enough to be honest. She said she wasn't sure the relationship had the depth she was looking for. I said I understood. I wasn't certain I understood, but I was certain I wanted to handle it correctly. We said we'd stay friends. We meant it, I thought. I meant it. I found out later what she had written in the chat about the breakup, what she had actually thought. but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Tuesday. It was an ordinary Tuesday in November. I was working from home. Mid-afternoon, I needed to check something on a website, and my laptop was in the bedroom charging. The laptop on the kitchen table was one I shared with my flatmate Danny, not in the group, not relevant to this story except that the laptop existed and it was there. I opened it. The browser was on a recipe Danny had been looking at. I opened a new tab. As I did, a notification slid down from the top right of the screen. iMessage. From a group chat. The preview showed 2 lines. I will not reproduce them exactly. I will tell you that the 2 lines were about me, about my appearance specifically. Written by Ravi. I looked at the notification for a moment. The reason the notification appeared on Danny's laptop requires a brief technical explanation, which I understand now though I didn't then. Danny and I had shared an Apple ID for a period when we were splitting a family subscription for a streaming service. At some point, neither of us had been careful about this. The iMessage syncing that comes with Apple ID sharing had been enabled. Danny's Mac was receiving messages intended for his phone. The group chat, which Ravi was apparently messaging from the same number as the iMessage account I had contact details for, appeared on the shared machine. I should have closed it. I should have looked away from the notification and opened my browser tab and not clicked on the Messages app in the dock. I clicked on the Messages app in the dock. The group was called Tuesday Crew. My group chat, the one I was a member of, the one we'd had for 4 years, was also called Tuesday Crew. I sat with that for a moment before I read anything else. The specific cruelty of the same name, whether it was deliberate, a joke among themselves that I was the one Tuesday Crew that didn't know about the other Tuesday Crew, or whether it was just coincidence. I've thought about it since. I don't know. I'm not sure it matters. I read the chat. I want to tell you what that was like, and I find that the accurate description is not what you'd expect. It wasn't immediate devastation. It was something closer to a very specific documentary calm. The calm of someone watching a film about something that is also happening to them, present enough to feel it, but detached enough to keep reading. I read with the methodical focus of someone who has decided that the full picture is necessary even if the full picture is terrible. The chat had 8 members. 7 of the 8 were people I considered close friends. The 8th was Maya. The earliest messages in the chat, which went back 8 months, were relatively mild. The kind of thing that lives in a gray area between banter and cruelty. The kind of thing that if you showed any individual message in isolation you might almost contextualize it as affectionate ribbing. But the context was not isolation. The context was 8 months of accumulation. My nose appeared in the first week of messages. A photograph had been taken at a social event. Someone had candid-shotted the group and I was in profile, and it had been shared in the chat with a caption I won't type here. 5 of the 7 responded. The responses were not kind. My weight appeared 3 weeks in, after the dinner where I told them about the Kweshiapan, after I had sat in a restaurant and told them the medical reality of it, and they had said we don't see it and you're being too hard on yourself. The timestamp on the chat message was 11:47 p.m. on the same night. Ravi had written a description of the dinner conversation that reduced what I had shared with genuine vulnerability, with real difficulty, into a punchline. 5 people responded to that one too. My job was a recurring theme. I work in local government administration. It is not glamorous. It is stable and it serves a function and I am good at it, and I have never pretended it was the career I dreamed of because it isn't, and I have made peace with the gap between what I dreamed of and what I have in the practical, quiet way of most adults who are not delusional about the texture of their lives. The chat found this funny, the steadiness of it, the lack of ambition in it. The gap between my height, I'm 6'2", which I suppose invites a certain expectation, and the reality of what I do with it. I read the messages about Ravi's breakdown on the M6. He had told the story in the chat, not straightforwardly, not, Elliot drove through the rain to rescue me and stayed until 2 in the morning. The version in the chat was filtered through a specific comedy of my expense. The phrasing implied I had invited myself, that I had made it more dramatic than it needed to be, that I had told the story back to him too many times afterward. I had never told the story at all. I'd barely mentioned it in a way that was tiresome. I read the messages about Sasha's money. She had apparently told the group that I had given her money during the difficult period. She had not, in her telling, described it as a kindness she was grateful for. She had described it as Elliot being weird about it, making her feel watched, using generosity as a way of maintaining social leverage. I sat with that one for longer than the others. Not because it was the worst thing in the chat, it wasn't, but because of the specific reframing of it. I had been careful. I had been careful not to make it a thing. I had covered the difference quietly, precisely so she wouldn't feel watched or indebted. And the covering had been taken and turned into evidence of exactly the dynamic I had been trying to avoid creating. Generosity reconstructed as control. Kindness as currency. I read the messages about Chris's 3 a.m. call. He had mentioned it in the chat, mentioned that I had stayed on the phone. He had mentioned it in a way that I can only describe as mocking the fact that I had stayed on the phone, that I had treated it like a bigger deal than it was, that I was the kind of person who answered 3 a.m. calls because I needed to be needed. I read the messages about Priya. This one I am going to move past quickly, not because it wasn't significant, but because what they wrote about her situation, not about me, about her situation, which they had clearly known about, which I had kept in complete confidence, is the part I find it hardest to write without a level of anger that would change the tone of this script in ways I don't want. I read about Dom's landlord situation, which had apparently been hilarious, and my Saturday afternoon on Shelter's website presented as a need to be the most useful person in any room. And then I scrolled further back, and I found Maya's messages. The breakup in Maya's account in the chat had not been what I had experienced. Her account was longer than I expected, written in pieces across several conversations, going back further than the breakup itself. Going back, I realized as I read, to a period when we were still together, when I thought everything was fine. I'm not going to reproduce what she wrote in full. Some of it is genuinely private, her private feelings about our relationship, which she was entitled to have, even if the articulation of them in a group chat was something else. What I will tell you is this. The breakup had been, in her framing, a relief, not the mutual, adult, we both know this isn't working conversation I had experienced. A relief from something she had found difficult to be in. She had written about my appearance in a way that made clear the coffee shop conversation about depth had not been the full reason. She had written about the medication and the weight in terms that would have been more at home in the chat's general tone toward me than in the voice of someone who had been in a relationship with me for 8 months. And then I found the messages from 6 weeks before the breakup. She had been sleeping with Jay. It was not ambiguous. It was not a thing I could read charitably or interpret differently with effort. It was explicit and it was documented, and it had been documented in the chat, our chat, the chat about me, with the particular intimacy of people who have been sharing a secret with a group and are confident the group is contained. Jay had been in my flat, not with Maya, separately, on a different occasion, helping me move a piece of furniture I couldn't manage alone. We'd had a beer after. He'd stayed for a couple of hours. Maya had asked me about it the next day, casually, and I'd told her Jay had come round and she'd said, "Oh nice, how is he?" That conversation was in the chat too, typed out by Maya with commentary. I closed the laptop. I closed it in the specific way of someone who is doing a physical thing, because their hands need something to do while the rest of them processes something too large for any single channel. I closed the laptop, and I put my hands flat on the table, and I looked at them for a while. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, with the precision I've tried to bring to everything else in this story. I felt small. That's the first thing and the most accurate thing. Not angry first, angry came, but not first. Small. The specific smallness of someone who has just found out that the version of themselves that existed in other people's minds was significantly different from the version they'd been living as. That the room they walked into every time was a room with a different atmosphere than the one they felt. That the warmth they thought they were in had a different temperature from a certain angle. I thought about the restaurant, my hands around a glass of water, the words about the questioning, we don't see it, you're being too hard on yourself. I thought about Maya's face across the coffee shop table in October, the adult, mutual, respectful conversation, the we'll stay friends, the I understand. I thought about Priya at 3 in the morning 18 months ago. I'll only say she is still here. I thought about all of it and I sat at the kitchen table in the afternoon light, and I felt small, and then I felt something shifting under the small, something harder and colder and more permanent. Not rage, something past rage. The place on the other side of rage where you get very still and very clear and the clarity feels almost like relief. I did not pick up my phone. I did not call anyone. I did not type a message. I got up, I made tea, I went back to work. I want to tell you about the decision, which was not dramatic and did not involve a speech or a revelation or a confrontation. The decision was no. Not to any specific thing, just no to the infrastructure, to the engine, to the being the person who shows up and covers the difference and answers the phone and drives through the rain. No. Not because I had calculated a revenge. Not because I wanted them to feel the absence in any particular pointed way, though I understood they would, eventually. Simply because I was done. Done in the specific way of someone who has been very tired for a long time and has finally been given a clear and documentable reason to stop. I didn't send a message that night. I didn't send one the next day. I let the silence accumulate and I let them interpret it however they were going to interpret it. The first thing that changed, I stopped being the one who organized things. This sounds small. It was not small. I had been the one who organized things for 6 years. The birthdays, the dinners, the casual check-ins that kept the connective tissue of the group alive. When I stopped sending those messages, the group went quiet in a way it had never gone quiet before. Not silent immediately, there were messages, conversations, fragments of interaction. But the scaffolding was gone, and the scaffolding, it turned out, was load-bearing. The first missed event, Ravi's birthday. It was in December. I had, in previous years, organized the dinner, booked the restaurant, coordinated who was coming and what the plan was. In December, I did not do this. I sent Ravi a message on the day that said happy birthday, brief and warm, and I left it at that. The dinner happened, they organized it among themselves, eventually. But it was chaotic and smaller than usual and 2 people dropped out because the logistics weren't managed and nobody had chased the stragglers. Ravi mentioned it to me afterward in a text that was almost, but not quite, asking why I hadn't been more involved. I said I'd been busy. He said sure. The second thing that changed, the favors stopped. Not dramatically. I didn't announce it. I simply stopped offering. When Dom mentioned he was having a problem with a new landlord different from the last one, different situation, I said that's a pain, hope it works out. I did not spend a Saturday afternoon on legal advice websites. When Sasha mentioned she was between freelance contracts again and things were tight, I said I hope something comes through soon. I did not quietly cover the difference. I want to be honest about this. These choices cost me something. Not practically, nothing material was lost to me by not covering Sasha's bills, but it cost something in terms of who I'd understood myself to be. I had been, for a long time, the person who showed up. Choosing not to show up felt, initially, like choosing not to be myself. I think that's the thing I sat with the longest in the months that followed. The question of whether the showing up had been a genuine expression of who I was, in which case removing it meant removing something real, or whether it had become a performance of belonging, a way of earning a seat at a table that had never fully reserved one for me anyway. I don't have a complete answer. I think it was both, at different times in different proportions. The third thing that changed, Maya. Maya messaged me in December, then in January. Friendly messages, the kind that would have looked, to anyone reading them, like the messages of a former partner maintaining a warm and adult connection. She asked how I was. She mentioned a film she'd seen that she thought I'd like. She referenced a conversation we'd had once about a book. I replied briefly, politely. Not coldly, I had no interest in performing coldness, just briefly. And the brevity was not like me, which she noticed, and the noticing came through in a slightly longer message in January that asked if I was all right and said I seemed distant. I said I was fine, just busy, hope you're well. She messaged Jay that night. I know because Jay, a few weeks later, mentioned to me in the slightly uncomfortable way of someone who isn't sure if they're doing the right thing but is doing it anyway, that Maya had seemed worried about me, that she'd asked Jay if I was okay. I said that's kind of her. Jay looked at me for a moment, then he changed the subject. He knew I knew something. I think they all knew by then that something had shifted, not what, just that the engine had gone quiet. I want to tell you about the spring. By March the group had contracted, not dissolved, not yet, but visibly smaller. The group chat messages were fewer and further between. Events happened less and were less attended when they did happen. The connective tissue I had been providing, the messages that pulled people back in when they drifted, the plans that gave the group a reason to assemble, the attention to each person's calendar that meant nobody felt forgotten, had not been replaced because nobody had understood it as something that needed replacing. They had experienced it as simply being in a group, not as something one person was consistently providing. Without it, they discovered that being in a group required more active maintenance than they had thought. Priya messaged me in March, a different kind of message from Maya's, not friendly maintaining but more direct. She said she felt like things had changed, and she didn't know why, and she missed me and asked if she'd done something wrong. I read that message 3 times. I thought about the 18 months ago, the phone call, the night I spent, the 2 weeks after. I thought about what was written in that chat. I wrote back, nothing's wrong, just needed some space, hope you're okay. She said okay. She didn't push. I think she understood, in the way that people who have been through something dark sometimes develop an accurate sensitivity to when someone else is choosing their distance carefully, that the space was real and she should leave it. I haven't spoken to Priya since. That is the thing in this story I find the hardest to sit with. Not Maya, not Jay, not Ravi or Sasha or Dom. Priya. Because whatever was written in that chat, she was also the person on the other end of that phone call. Both things are true. I hold them both. I haven't resolved them. By summer, the group was functionally gone. Not through any dramatic conclusion. It simply ran out of reasons to exist. The chat went days without a message. The events stopped being organized because nobody was organizing them, and nobody, it turned out, was going to start. Individual friendships had never been strong enough to sustain themselves on their own. They had always been mediated through the group. And the group had always been mediated through me. And without either layer, there was nothing left underneath. I heard this through secondary channels, a former colleague who knew some of them, a mutual acquaintance who mentioned in passing that the Tuesday crew didn't seem to do much anymore. The Tuesday crew. I made a noise that I think was almost a laugh. I moved in October. Not because of any of this specifically. I'd been thinking about the move for a while, and the timing was right, and the new city had things the old one didn't. But I won't pretend the move was entirely unrelated. I was ready for geography that had no history in it. A kitchen table that hadn't had a laptop on it with a notification that changed everything. I don't think about them often. Less than I expected to. The medication is still working. My brain is still regulated. My moods are still navigable. I am still okay in the ways that matter. I have a therapist I see monthly. I have 2 friends from the new city who are new enough that I'm watching them carefully, with a consideration I didn't apply before, in the way of someone who has learned what to look for. My nose is still my nose. The weight is still changing. I'm working with my psychiatrist on an adjusted dosing schedule that might reduce the metabolic effect. We'll see. My body is doing what it's doing, and I am trying to be patient with it in the way my doctor told me to be patient with it. I am okay. I want to be precise about this because okay is a word I used to use as a deflection, and now I'm trying to use it as an accurate description of an actual state. I am okay. Not healed in the clean cinematic way, not without the residue of what I read on that Tuesday afternoon, but okay, stable, here. There is one more thing. A few months after the move, I was going through old messages on my phone, deleting things, clearing space, and I came across the photograph from the event where someone had candid shotted the group. The one in profile, the one that had been shared in the chat with the caption. I looked at it for a while. It's a photograph of a tall man with a big nose at a party with his friends. He's mid-laugh. His head is tilted back slightly. He looks like someone who is having a good time. I kept the photograph. I'm not sure why, but I kept it.
Hey, my dear listeners, this is Talks from the Net. I am grateful for your time and listening till the end. If you enjoyed my content, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify too. See you in the next video.